Ever since I was 14, I started doing a lot of shows, and I do mean a lot of shows. Most of them were cover gigs, of course. My favorites were the original stuff that I would make. However, life has put me in a position where I had to be playing either keyboards or bass or guitar for somebody else's band. And over the years of me playing in a small country called Macedonia and then moving over to the United States, where again I could just continue my trend of playing with other bands, I've noticed that a lot of musicians have their own sign language. Now, different artists are going to have their own sign language with their bandmates, because after playing for such a long time, they've managed to pick up on each other's cues. You probably notice musicians point up or down in the middle of a set, show up like a peace sign or like an upside down peace sign. Maybe they'll do a little twirl with their pointer finger up in the air. All these gestures are really cool while they're performing on stage. Reality is, these gestures are most of the time used to send a signal to their bandmates. In the US, I've noticed different types of sign language used when it comes to live cover gigs, and you can imagine how confusing this was for me to understand the first time I moved here. The venues are typically bigger, and when a whole band is playing, and if the band is big enough, the musicians would typically talk amongst themselves. But if you're a 3-piece or a 4-piece band with a large crowd and the energy is flowing, you don't have the time to stop and talk to somebody. Of course, there are outliers that actually play in front of a huge crowd. A big band like 𝗚𝗚𝗢𝗚, for example, they use in-ear monitors to tell them when the next part of the song is coming, or when the next breakdown is coming, or when they should switch up to a different beat, etc., etc. Now, my experience is ultimately different because I've been on both sides of the world for different types of these gigs. I've played smaller venues with a larger group and big venues with a smaller group, and have noticed that not every musician knows the signs they need. So in this video, I would like to share all the signs that you should know if you want to be a part of a cover band. Mind you, these won't work for everyone everywhere. These are mostly for cover artists, and knowing these have saved me on multiple occasions. Okay, let me paint a scenario here. You are in a loud venue, you're playing with a 4-piece band, and unfortunately the singer has kind of a sore throat. You need to take one of the songs down a whole step. Sometimes when you're in the heat of the moment, a singer will communicate to you in a different sign. Those signs are typically shown by hands, and all of these notes have their own signal. C is typically shown as a reverse pointer finger. Some people like to use their thumb, but you get the idea. If you're asking me why C is the first note, that's because most familiar melodies use the major scale, and since C major scale uses all the natural notes with no sharps or flats, it makes it easy to remember, and it makes sense in every musician's head. D is very similar to C, where instead of one finger, you point 2 fingers up, and that's your D major scale. The only thing I would say is, if you're in the UK, my advice is to flip your hand every time you show a D major scale, because this means something completely different in the UK. So almost got in a fight for that. We continue this process all the way up to G. Now, since there's only 5 of these puppies on each hand, musicians had to figure out a different way to communicate A and B. If you're that type of person that just shouted at the screen and said, "Just use both hands," you can definitely use both hands and lift up 6 fingers. Whatever. But the issue here is you're lifting up your hand from the instrument, which is not a great thing to do when you're in the middle of a song. Musicians needed to figure out how to show both signs A and B by using just one hand. The typical way that I've noticed musicians communicate this is by an upside down peace sign, signaling the A. And if you want to show them the letter P, you hold up an OK sign. Now that I've covered the major scales, how do we use the same system to go with the minor scales? The answer is really simple, and I didn't figure it out until I was 16 playing backup keys for a Ukrainian group that came into the city. They needed a person to play some cover songs with them in their original songs, and I said sure. But in the middle of a transition, one of them turns to me and goes, I was confused. It didn't click in my head that if you bend your fingers, that means it's a minor. We just stopped the song at that point, and one of them just turns to me and says, whenever I bend my fingers, that means it's a minor. After that, I've just never forgotten that rule. So when signaling any of these signs, if you bend your finger, that is a minor. So if you want to do an A minor, you can show it upside down peace sign and then just bend your fingers like that. If you want to do a B minor, you show an OK sign and then just bend your fingers like that. Well, this covers all the major and minor scales with all the natural notes. But what if we want to do sharps and flats? For example, what if we want to do different scale modes? This is where a lot of the gray area starts to pop up. All honesty, I haven't found a common ground for different scales and different modes. But the reality is, if you are a cover artist, you're not gonna be going towards these modes. Most of the time, you'll be sticking to A minor, E minor, G major, C major, those kinds of things. Because the repertoire of a cover artist can range anywhere between 300 to thousands of songs, it's really imperative to keep things as simple as possible when it comes to cover gigs. Plus, if you know the song, then signaling the scale should probably just translate everything in your head. As for sharps and flats, everybody does it a little bit different. If we take a look at the piano and see how all the notes are laid out, we'd recognize that there are 5 black keys among the other white keys. These keys may have a different name depending on the scale that we're in. If we are in F major, then this note would be a B flat. But that same note can have a different name if the scale is changed to, say, F sharp. Musicians had to figure out how to simplify this process without all this mess. The best way to do this, and this is by no means perfect, we use the previous sign language but with an extra step. Typically, some musicians like to show the sign of the scale that they're going to be playing at, followed by a point up or a point down, or a thumbs up or a thumbs down. The more common one that I've seen musicians use is the left hand fist, or left hand B sign or K sign, or the right hand flipped over. Musicians are resourceful creatures, what can you say? So make sure you follow along. A fist sign means that the note is sharp, and a OK sign with the left hand means that the note is flat. Let's say we want to play in an A sharp minor. You would point A minor and then raise your fist sharp. That is A minor sharp. If you want to tell your bandmates that you want to play in the key of E flat major, you would show E flat, and of course, since there were no bends, that is an E flat major. The one gotcha moment is the B scale, because some musicians will just go right hand, left hand for some reason. I never understood that, so I always go right hand and then just flip over, and 9 times out of the 10 the other person gets it.
As I was editing this video, I noticed that I left out some key moments, and there were some other signs that I learned over the years that I quickly wanted to rapid fire and share them with you. Number 1 is finger pointing at a bandmate. Typically what this means is if somebody points at a bandmate, that means that they start the song. If the frontman or the leader of the band starts like giving you like a air punch, that typically means that the kick is the only thing that should be heard at that point. When there's a sweeping motion with the finger, that typically means that you should go around one more time. And if there's a signal with the hand extended upwards, that means that the song is about to end and everybody should come to a whole stop.
These are just some things that I've picked up from gigging over the years, and I haven't seen anyone write these down. So I just thought to bring a little bit of attention to all of this. These are like unspoken rules that you have to learn, much like don't unplug your guitar until the sound guy says so, and don't start setting up while the other band is playing. Let me know if you know any other tips down in the comment section right below the sub button. Okay, bye.